Hello, everyone. Welcome or welcome back to Dolce Martini. I hope you're doing well and I hope you're having an amazing day. Just a quick check, do I have something in my teeth? I don't think I do because last week's episode, Jesus Christ, I'll start looking in the mirror every time I press record from now on because that was something that I was like not really excited about. But, anyways, what I'm excited about is today's episode because today's episode is one I have been promising since the very first episode of Dirty Martini in 2024. And I feel like this is going to be so incredibly underwhelming. But who cares? Because I'm going to have fun. And I hope you have fun too. Because, ladies and gentlemen, this is the long awaited cancel culture episode. And I really wondered how I should approach this episode because if you may not be familiar with this, I did my master's degree thesis on cancel culture. So, this is a topic I've been exploring quite a bit academically, scientifically, for over 6 months now, and it's a little bit up to here with me on this topic. But I find it a fascinating topic, which is why I would love to discuss it with you. And there's so many points of view through which we can look at cancel culture. But the one with which I'm going to approach it today is I want in this episode to explore the advantages and disadvantages of cancel culture. Now, going into this episode, you may already have made up your mind and you may perceive cancel culture as something that's necessary or as something that's so incredibly regressive. There's merit to both of these arguments, and I would love to present both of these arguments to you with a few points to each of them, and you can then make up your own mind and see, because I think it is less straightforward than we actually perceive it to be, and that cancel culture is just a tool, and it's about how we implement this tool that actually renders it positive and progressive and democratic or socially regressive and an annihilating witch hunt. Um, but what I want to try and do with this episode is I would love, so I have a few points I have written down here of the things I want to touch upon. And I would love to go over each and one of them. But what I will try to do, because everybody knows that if I am nothing if I'm not a yapper, I will try to be very much straight to the point today. Because if you've been here before, you may have noticed that I tend to just like if I hear one word, it triggers another story, and I go into the second story to then go back to the first one. No, I just completed an LVMH course online. And what I really liked about the structuring of these, let's call them mini lectures that they gave, was how much to the point they were. And there was so much more that they could have elaborated on, but they didn't because they were like, this is the gist. The gist is what you need in order to be able to make up your mind and form your own opinion. And if you are interested in me diving deeper into any of these topics, do let me know because this is something I can talk about for days on end without getting bored. But I would like to try and explore this more. I don't want to say superficial, but more unilinear, let's put it like this. And I don't mean it in a negative way, form of expressing myself, because I do tend to elaborate a lot, because I tend to give examples and I just want to put it in a way that's comprehensive. But I feel like we here are meaning making, critical, analytical individuals who can elaborate on the thoughts that are presented to us and the ideas that are presented to us, because audiences are not passive, audiences are active meaning makers. So let's just see how this one goes. We'll see if I'm even able to do that, because it's just so in my nature to not shut up. But without further ado, welcome to the cancel culture episode. Now, before we explore this advantageous and disadvantageous side of cancel culture, I feel like it is necessary to provide a little bit of a background of cancel culture, a little bit of a definition, if you so wish, although this is a phenomenon that is a bit too comprehensive to be synthesized in a two-sentence definition. But ultimately, on a broader general scale, what cancel culture encompasses is online discourse and actions, predominantly online, but also offline in terms of protests and, let's say, boycotting. But we will be focusing today on this online counterpart of cancel culture as the phenomenon itself, though rooted in offline activities, manifested online and then grew and became more of an online phenomenon. So, cancel culture is online discourse and actions which arise as a form of reaction or retribution following a certain values or functional or moral or ethical transgression by an entity. And that entity can be an organization, can be a person, and an entity, crucially, that has social influence. Because if, let's say, I now here, without having any social influence, without my discourse being something on a grander scale that's going to reach a lot of people, first of all, not many people are going to engage with my discourse. And second of all, and that means that on this scale, I would be less likely to be canceled, as what I perpetuate online as a discourse and as a narrative is less influential than, for example, that of a person of a grander fame and celebrity. And this is like a very crucial aspect of cancel culture, although it's now, I feel like, also penetrating us, the lower classes, in terms of celebrity, and us common folk, the peasants, the muggles. But what we're going to discuss today is cancel culture with relation to these socially influential celebrities, including organizations and people. Basically, cancel culture as a phenomenon is rooted in Twitter, now X, but Twitter back in the day. And it became a thing initially in the Black female community on Twitter, where women of color would demand accountability and justice following certain perceived as immoral actions and discourse that were perpetuated online, seen as harmful. And because this society on Twitter demanded accountability and justice and rectifying of these actions, the narrative, the hashtag, let's put it, of cancel culture and the phenomenon that it turned to, like it became, proliferated. And basically, it became more than just a nomination, it became more than a diary entry. It became a social movement for justice. And it grew in some of the biggest manifestations of cancel culture are the Me Too movement and the Black Lives Matter movement, which I invite you to look up and research and explore on your own time, as those are things that would require their separate episodes or like multiple episodes by themselves that I would not be able to do justice now here in just two sentences. But basically, cancel culture, in a sense, encompasses third party punishments. This third party is society or audiences, and these punishments can be quite varied. They are a spectrum of punishments ranging from more mild to rather extreme in terms of, for example, silencing, deplatformization, boycotting, flaming, insults, and so on and so forth. Now, by me saying this as a form of punishment, naturally, what probably arises as you listen to this is negative connotations. But before we dive into why cancel culture can be condemned and perhaps the tools that it utilizes should be condemned, I would like to point out why cancel culture is by nature, it's not inherently good or bad. And I would like to point out the positive sides of cancel culture because, like I mentioned, it was first established and perpetuated as a movement for justice. Now, there is this theory in media studies of the media on a grander scale. The media, I mean, like journalism, for example, or the news channels, or everything that encompasses media in terms of an information sharing channel as an agenda setting device. Now, what is meant by that? Agenda setting devices like the media, for example, in terms of journalism, basically imagine the public. We have a certain capacity, a certain ceiling of the attention that we can give to the world around us because we only have so many hours in the day and we only have so much free time. And what we are very selective with what we pay attention to. And what we pay attention to in media is determined by the media channels. And what is highlighted as something worth paying attention to is something that's seen as newsworthy, or nowadays also as clickable, as clicks and engagement are unfortunately what drives a lot of journalism now. And basically, um, because of this ability of media to set the agenda of what we pay attention to by expanding on certain stories and familiarizing it with certain topics, but not others, is why certain things, certain phenomena, certain people are part of public discourse and others are not. Cancel culture in a way, plays into this agenda setting characteristic, trait, or function of the media and turns it on its head. Because historically speaking, the people who used to work in the media were people with training. And it was a very selective approach of what stories were to be told. Nowadays, with the rise of social media and especially this interactive side of social media, because the media is no longer a unilinear path where you as an audience are served information on a platter and you just accept that information. No, now we're talking about a dual relationship. You, as the part of the audience, have the agency, the ability, and the opportunity to create stories. Now, this is beautiful, though it can be precarious because this form of, let's call it citizen journalism, carries implications for what does journalism actually constitute and who actually is a journalist. Is it a person with education, or is it everybody who has a phone and has the opportunity to write a post online? So while this precarious side is definitely important to note, this interactivity and this ability to tell stories by yourself rather than wait on someone else to tell your story to others is a crucial aspect of the public sphere and democratic discourse. Because what cancel culture did and what social media did is it took away the power of these highly selective, limited in space, be it physical, virtual, or metaphorical and literal, um, in terms of setting the agenda. It took this power away from the established media channels and gave it back to the people. Because I, for example, am like, there's people out there on the internet who are way better educated than me, way more better equipped than me, to create podcasts or tell stories online. But because of this, because of social media, I, as an individual, have the agency and opportunity to press record and tell my story online. While this leads to oversaturation of this market, it also leads to democratization of discourse. Because now, instead of me, let's say something happens to me, instead of me waiting for a media channel to pick up my story, which is highly unlikely, and tell it from a perspective that fits their channel positioning and narrative and just point of view, I get to tell it myself. I get to tell my personal experience from my personal point of view. You get first person narratives. And this is crucial because this means that marginalized voices and overlooked stories now have the platform to be on a platform. And this is very, very crucial as it ties into this concept developed by Jürgen Habermas of the public sphere as this playground of democracy where ideas and discourses take place and are welcomed. Now, the Habermas concept of public sphere is definitely worthy of criticism, especially considering that it perpetuates a certain heterosexual white perception and construction of what the public sphere is. But still, the concept of the public sphere as this, let's imagine it as a metaphorical square where ideas are traded and discussed, is very, very crucial. And cancel culture basically proliferates and expands this public sphere as it democratizes it and does not make access to this public sphere limited through an entry point of, let's say, an elite media channel. Because, like I mentioned, I, as someone, for example, without means, without the particular journalistic education, still have the opportunity to tell stories. What this shift meant, what this agenda setting um, switch meant, is that not only are marginalized voices and stories now amplified, they were brought into public awareness and public cognition. Because if your story has never been told before for a larger public to hear, it is very understandable that the larger public may not be familiar with such a narrative. And storytelling is crucial to humanity, not only because this is how humanity sustained its history and how humanity survived, and because we are innately storytelling beings and we live and breathe stories, but it's also crucial. Do you mind? Do you mind? The people who are revving their engines are just trying to ruin my mood. They're trying to infiltrate my storytelling, but they're also entitled to tell their stories because this is the point of democracy. And basically, um, this gave a liberation, a freedom of speech, and, like I mentioned multiple times, democratization of discourse. And what this suggests is that now the human experience, because we have way more nuances of human stories, as we get to hear more stories, the human experience becomes richer and more nuanced. And we get to learn people's passions, but also people's pains, and what we can do to increase the help we give to others and eradicate the pain we cause to others, because this is crucial for a progressive society. In that sense, we can argue that cancel culture can be perceived as a protector of the public sphere. Because the public sphere, as it suggests, is made out of the public. The public is the people. And if we protect the people through the discourses and the narratives that we perpetuate, is how we progress. And basically, cancel culture as a tool that tries to prevent the distribution of harmful discourse and actions and unethical behaviors, it tries to minimize the inflicted pain. And it tries to provide equitable opportunities for everyone without harming the individuals, without harming the social groups, and recognizing the pain that certain discourse can have on them. And by minimizing the access of harmful individuals, and by individuals I mean people, but also organizations. So minimizing the impact they have on a grander scale of the public, of the audiences, is what positions cancel culture as a form of moral police. And in a sense, what this suggests is that it's not only moral police, because of the way cancel culture operates, it has turned into moral self policing. Because now I, as someone who has seen what repercussions follow after certain actions, I am going to become reflective of my own actions and the discourse that I distribute here, for example, on Dirty Martini or anywhere else in any form of public sphere, because public sphere is not just online, it's also offline. And its public sphere is not just on a grander scale, it's also in your at work or at school, your friend group. All of that are many public spheres. That comprise a larger public sphere. And because I've seen what repercussions follow after harmful discourse and actions and unethical and immoral behaviors, I would not want to experience those repercussions, which is what will make me reflect on what I do and what I say and actually make it align with what is socially acceptable, socially fruitful, and socially progressive. And it is going to minimize my desire and perhaps the chances of me performing something unethical and harmful, as it is going to be turned on its head and pointed back at me. Because this inflicted pain now is no longer solely and purely just accepted. It is fought back against, which I would say is a very positive thing. Because what this means is that we become self reflective and, in a way, imagine this as the panopticon. Panopticon, for those of you who may not be familiar, is this form of jail that was developed, I want to say, in the 18th century. If I'm mistaken with the century, please forgive me. But it's basically this circular building, and the cells are positioned in such a way that they all look inside, like in the inside of the building. And in the center of that building, there is, let's call it a watchtower. But at the same time, you can also see what others are doing. You can see the other inmates. So you know that you're constantly and continuously being surveilled. So what this means is that it was believed that inmates, because of their continuous and constant non-stop surveillance, will act better and will rectify their behaviors. So, in a sense, social media and the proliferation of cancel culture have contributed to this new online version of the panopticon. And now, whether you see this as good or bad is up for you to decide. I'm not here to feed you any opinions. I'm just here to provide different perspectives. So, all of this sounds good, right? That we are amplifying marginalized voices. We are hearing stories that otherwise wouldn't have been available for us to hear. What this means is that everybody has, well, everybody is definitely an improvement, but still not everybody. But there is a trend of increasing engagement in the public sphere of the individual becoming important and meaningful and not just lost in a grand like a larger audience. So what this means is that, in a sense, cancel culture is good in terms of the fact that it shows people what can happen if they perform negatively in the public sphere, in terms of they use derogatory language, they perform unethically, they cause harm, they inflict pain, be it physical, mental, emotional, or other. So, in that sense, it incentivizes people to be self reflective and to be fruitful, progressive participants in a democratic public sphere. Now, on the other hand, while this drive and strive for social justice sounds all good, the tools which cancel culture uses are not necessarily all positive and do not necessarily contribute to the eradication of the problems and the structures which have facilitated the problems. And by problem I mean the use of derogatory language or infliction of physical, emotional, mental, psychological harm. Basically, cancel culture can be seen as negative on multiple pillars. On the one side, it is a form of third party social punishments. And what is crucial to point out is that a lot of the times, what's to be noted in these third party punishments is the discrepancy between inflicted harm and received punishment, whereby, because there's no clear rules of how to do cancel culture and how to do third party social punishments, what this means is that people who have inflicted lesser harm than others can still receive a very severe punishment. Now, what is perceived as lesser harm is very subjective, and I am not here to define what is harmful and what is not. And I am not here to tell you of whether or not you should be insulted by a behavior or not. I am not here to dictate your experiences on this life, and I'm not here to tell you what's right or wrong. It's just that basically the the pain infliction can be perceived as a spectrum whereby certain behaviors, actions, and discourses are more harmful than others. And because there's no such structure in terms of classification of these social party, like third party social punishments, it is difficult to match the severity of the punishment, the severity of the transgression with the severity of the punishment. This carries implications of whether the seek for justice is justified and whether it is just in itself. But another thing that cancel culture has been criticized for is the fact that it leads to individual silencing and censorship through the deplatformization of these transgressors, be it the individuals or the organizations or etc. And this form of censorship, because of, like I mentioned earlier, people become self-reflective and they're like, well, I'm not going to do this even though this is what I wanted to do. Some people argue that this is a form of censorship. Now, a few minutes ago, I talked about the public sphere and how it should by nature be democratic and all-inclusive. And censorship in it by itself is not all inclusive. Because while I agree that certain things should not be perpetuated as narratives or as discourse, and language should be monitored as language carries power, this manifestation of cancel culture as censorship goes against its very idea to be democratic, to be a public sphere, because censorship is not necessarily democratic. As in a democracy, everyone should have the right to express their own opinions. So, this policing of discourse and this censorship is one of the biggest criticisms that people uh, put towards cancel culture. And related to this is that this censorship and silencing happens on an individual level. And what it ends up doing is that not only does it lead to personal and professional ruin for the perpetrator, but it also crucially does not solve the problem. It deals with a manifestation of that problem. It cures a symptom, but it does not solve the illness because it does not pay attention to the underlying structures which have facilitated this transgression in the first place. And basically, in that regard, you can look at cancel culture as an I rather than an S form of intervention. Now, what are S and I interventions? Well, those I is for individual, S is for social or societal. I believe societal. I don't know, one of those, but basically like a grander scale than individual. And basically, an I intervention is something that, let's say, a government or an entity introduces as an intervention, as a cure on an individual level. And it positions the blame on the individual and puts the individual in a position where they are responsible for their actions, and they are the ones with the agency, power, and responsibility to fix their own behaviors. These actions, these interventions, these I interventions, are easier and cheaper to implement, but they do not lead to the necessary social restructuring that would ultimately eradicate the manifestations of these problems in the first place. And the eradication and the social restructuring is the job of an S intervention, which basically looks at the root of the problem and tries to solve it there. It doesn't simply treat symptoms, it develops a cure for the illness. And because these social and societal restructurings take a lot of time, a lot of effort, and are not always unilinear and take a lot of resources and a lot of joint efforts, they are not as easily and as frequently implemented as I interventions. So, in that regard, we can look at cancel culture as a form of I intervention because it silences the perpetrator that, let's say, for example, performed a homophobic act. But cancel culture in and by itself, the way it is practiced nowadays, does not go deeper into the root of homophobia to uproot it. So it treats the symptom but doesn't cure the illness. So it silences one individual that acts homophobically, but does not erase homophobia, which means that there is going to be another homophobic person and another one and another one. And it just becomes this vicious cycle of we're silencing this person, because the ideas and the narratives that they distribute are harmful for our society, and they should not have this epistemic authority and this social influence to navigate and engage in public discourse on that grander of a scale if their discourse and actions are inflicting harm and pain on so many individuals and just perpetrate or perpetuate just harmful actions and immoral behaviors. So while cancel culture does that, it doesn't really look into why this homophobia exists and how do we eradicate it. In that sense, one can argue that cancel culture is not necessarily a fruitful way to solve polemics and fix societal issues. Because what it does by silencing this individual is that it puts the individual under the spotlight. And by doing this, it attributes, let's continue with our example of homophobia, it attributes these homophobic expressions or actions or discourses to that individual. What this means is that this homophobic action is no longer contextualized and it's depoliticized. And what this means is that it is perceived as an odd thing out, like this homophobic person is the odd man out, and this homophobia is attributed to their personal traits and characteristics rather than to the structures which underlie them. And because no person is a single standing individual that lives in a vacuum, but we're all a part of a society, looking at a single manifestation and attributing homophobia solely to the character and the personal traits of this homophobic person overlooks the structures and the context which have nurtured these homophobic ideas. So, in that regard, cancel culture is regressive. It is retribution, reaction, and it's condemnable. However, perceiving cancel culture as this digital ill is overlooking all the arenas for public progress that it suggests and can facilitate, and condemning cancel cultures completely and saying that it's unfruitful and that it's solely derogatory and does not contribute to the bettering of our society would be to overlook its contribution to the democratization of discourse and the amplification of previously overlooked stories, people, and experiences. So, in that sense, I would say that cancel culture, in and by itself, is not inherently good or bad. It's not necessarily inherently moral or immoral. It's not inherently progressive or regressive. It is a tool that people, with their actions, can make to be positive or negative. And in that sense, cancel culture, because of this duality, can be perceived either as a bloodthirsty witch hunt or a natural step, a necessary step of the development of a democratic, progressive society and discourse. I am not going to tell you whether cancel culture is good or bad. This is for you to make up on your own. It's for you to make these decisions and adjust your lenses and perceptions. But what I'm trying to do with this episode is to say that cancel culture is not as straightforward as we may perceive it to be. And like everything else in this life, on this earth, it has its advantages and disadvantages. And in our it's our responsibility as the beings that developed it to use it to progress rather than solely punish. Because if this punishment does not allow the space for rectifying one's behavior and learning from mistakes and showing growth, then that, in my opinion, is not really progressive and democratic. Because we all make mistakes. And of course, some mistakes are more severe than others, and some mistakes deserve harsher punishment than others. But in this condemning of the perpetrators, what we should not forget to do is leave room for growth. Because if the person is open to listening to others' lived experiences and learning why their actions or discourse are harmful and need to be rectified, then cancel culture should leave room for growth and should not be lead to a complete censorship and silencing. But then I guess, would that be different if the person does not want to rectify their behavior and is not open to hear subjective experiences and lived stories? I don't know. I really don't know. And even though I studied this for over half a year, I also don't have an answer. I guess that it's basically the same way people are. It has its inherent good things and inherent bad things, but it's not inherently good or bad. In that sense, it can be perceived as a blank canvas, and it is us as audiences' responsibility to paint a good picture on that canvas rather than destroy it. Because this destruction of this canvas, if let's say we perceive it as manifestation of art as the purpose and the core of the human experience, can lead to self-destruction. And I do think that difficult conversations must be had, and that we should not just be putting ourselves in our filter bubbles and social bubbles of comfort, because this is not what leads to growth. It actually leads to more radicalization, and radicalization is not necessarily democratic because it is non-acceptive of other behaviors and points of view. And this is me criticizing it, but at the same time, I know that in certain aspects of my life, I'm very critical and I am very radical. And I don't know how acceptive I would be of other people's behaviors, beliefs, points of views. I don't know. I really don't know. And I don't want to blame cancel culture for this radicalization, but cancel culture is definitely a part of the equation of what it means to be a part of the public sphere nowadays, and what it means to be act ethically, behave well, and be a fruitful contribution to a democratic public sphere. I don't know. I find this topic very, very fascinating. And there's a lot more that we can talk about this. But for whatever reason, I am starting to lose my voice. So, with that being said, I want to thank you all so much for listening to this episode. I really hope you found it interesting. I hope it wasn't underwhelming considering that I've been edging it for 2 years. Um, Share your opinions with me. I would love to hear why you would think that cancel culture is good or why you would think that cancel culture is bad. Because for me, cancel culture is both good and bad. It's about what you make out of it. Like I mentioned, it's a tool. So please share your opinions. I would be more than fascinated to acquaint myself with them. But until then, I want to thank you all so much for listening to this episode, watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you in the next one. And if you would like for me to dive deeper into my specific research, in which I researched cancel culture in terms of celebrities and their transgressions, do let me know. I would gladly elaborate on that. But with that being said, thank you so much for listening or watching this episode, and I hope to see you in the next one. But until then, stay hydrated, wear sunscreen, and don't support genocide. Bye!